The sun had begun its descent, casting a golden glow over the suburban streets as the ambulance sped through the narrow lanes, its siren screaming and lights flashing urgently. Inside, Emily, a 32-year-old expectant mother, lay on the gurney, her face pale and contorted with pain. Her contractions came in relentless waves, each one tightening her grip on her husband Jason's hand, leaving his knuckles white. "It's okay, Emily," Jason murmured, trying to steady his voice despite the fear gnawing at him. He reached up to brush a strand of damp hair from her forehead. "We're almost there, just hang on a little longer." Emily, managing a strained smile through the agony, let out a shaky breath. "Tell that to this little one," she whispered, her voice tinged with both humor and desperation as another contraction stole her words. She squeezed Jason's hand tighter, her nails digging into his skin as she fought to hold back a cry. Seated near the gurney, Paramedic Alex maintained an air of calm despite the tension filling the cramped space. His years of experience had prepared him for chaotic moments like this, though Emily's obvious pain tugged at even his steady composure. "You're doing great, Mrs. Bennett," Alex said, glancing back at her with a reassuring nod. "We're less than 5 minutes away from the hospital. Just keep breathing. We'll get you there." Emily tried to follow his instructions, inhaling deeply and letting the air out in short, controlled bursts. Jason, his heart pounding as he watched her struggle, leaned closer. "Did you hear that?" "We're in good hands," he said, though the words felt hollow against the rising tide of helplessness washing over him. He searched Alex's face for any sign of doubt, but the paramedic's calm demeanor was unshaken. Just as Emily let out a muffled cry, the ambulance jolted unexpectedly. Alex's brow furrowed as he glanced up toward the windshield. "What's going on?" Jason asked, his voice edged with panic. "Why are we slowing down?" Alex craned his neck to peer through the front window, the flashing lights reflecting eerily off a police cruiser parked diagonally across the lane, effectively blocking their path. A uniformed officer stepped out of the vehicle, his face partially obscured by the shadows of the setting sun. "What in the world?" Alex muttered under his breath before turning to Jason and Emily. "Stay calm," he said firmly. "I'll handle this." Lowering the passenger side window as the officer approached, Alex kept his voice measured. "Is there a problem, officer?" The cop, identified by the nameplate on his chest as Officer Thompson, leaned down, his hands planted on his hips in a posture of authority. "What's the rush?" he asked coldly, his tone void of empathy. Alex blinked, momentarily taken aback. "Sir, we're an ambulance on an emergency call. My patient is in active labor, and we need to get to County General immediately." Thompson's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening as he nodded slowly, as though unconvinced. "I saw you run a red light back there," he said matter-of-factly. "That's a traffic violation, ambulance or not." Alex's patience thinned, but he kept his composure. "With all due respect, sir, we're on a Code 3 emergency. Running a red light is completely legal under these circumstances. Every minute counts for my patient." But Thompson wasn't budging. "Rules apply to everyone," he retorted flatly. "I'll need to see the license and registration for this vehicle." Jason, who had been quietly clenching his fists in the back, couldn't stay silent any longer. "Are you serious right now?" he barked, his voice cracking with a mix of anger and desperation. "My wife is in labor. We're wasting precious time. She needs a hospital, not a traffic stop." Thompson turned his steely gaze on Jason. "Sir, I'm talking to the EMT, not you," he snapped. Alex placed a calming hand on Jason's shoulder, silently urging him to keep his emotions in check. "Officer," Alex began again, his voice steady but firm, "this is an emergency. My patient's life is at risk. Please, we don't have time for this." But Thompson's face twisted with irritation. "I don't think you understand," he said, his tone icy. "I saw you blow through a red light, and it's my job to enforce the law. I need to see your paperwork." Frustration bubbled beneath Alex's calm exterior, but he knew escalating the situation would only make matters worse. "You're putting my patient's life in danger by stopping us here," he said, his voice now edged with sharpness. Thompson stepped closer, his stance becoming more confrontational. "Don't tell me about the law," he sneered. "I know the law. From where I'm standing, you're out of line." Suddenly, Thompson grabbed the handle of the ambulance door and yanked it open, his movements aggressive. Alex instinctively stepped back, his hands raised in a gesture of non-aggression. "Hey, there's no need for this," Alex said evenly, though his heart raced. "We're just trying to save a life here." But Thompson seemed unmoved, his jaw set with defiance. "You think you can disobey an officer's orders and get away with it?" he growled, his voice rising. Then, in one swift motion, Thompson swung his fist, striking Alex squarely on the jaw. The impact sent Alex stumbling backward into the cabinets, a sharp burst of pain radiating through his face. Jason shot up from his seat, his voice shaking with fury. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he shouted, his face flushed with anger. Emily's weak voice called out from behind him, her breath labored. "Jason, please, it hurts," her pained plea only fueled his determination. "Move out of the way," Jason demanded, stepping toward Thompson despite the officer's imposing stance. But Thompson responded by shoving Jason backward, sending him reeling against the side of the ambulance. The tension reached a boiling point as bystanders in nearby cars began to slow, their phones raised to record the escalating confrontation. It wasn't until the wail of additional sirens pierced the air that the power dynamic began to shift. Two police vehicles pulled up behind Thompson's cruiser, their lights casting red and blue flashes across the growing crowd. A senior officer with gray streaks in his hair stepped out, his no-nonsense demeanor evident in every step he took. "Officer Thompson," the senior officer barked, his tone sharp and commanding, "what's going on here?" Thompson straightened, clearly trying to regain his composure. "Sir, I stopped this ambulance for a traffic violation," he began, but the senior officer cut him off with a withering glare. "You stopped an ambulance transporting a patient in labor," the senior officer said incredulously, his eyes narrowing. He glanced at the scene, Alex nursing a bruised jaw, Jason visibly shaken, and Emily's pale, straining face visible through the ambulance window. "Step aside, Thompson. We'll handle this from here," he ordered firmly. Thompson hesitated, his pride warring with the authority of his superior, but the weight of the crowd's disapproval, and the cameras capturing every moment, left him no choice. His shoulders slumped as he retreated to his cruiser, his face flushed with embarrassment. The senior officer, who introduced himself as Captain Morales, turned back to Alex and Jason. "Are you all right?" he asked Alex, his gaze briefly flicking to the bruise on the paramedic's cheek. "I'm fine," Alex replied, his voice steady despite the lingering sting of pain. "But my patient isn't. She needs to get to the hospital immediately." Morales nodded decisively. "Understood. Let's not waste another second." Turning to the ambulance driver, he motioned for him to proceed. "You're clear to go," Morales said. "We'll take care of this." As the ambulance roared back to life, Jason climbed in beside Emily, taking her hand in his once more. The tension in his chest eased slightly as the vehicle surged forward, carrying them closer to safety. Meanwhile, Captain Morales faced the crowd, his stern expression conveying both authority and apology. "Thank you for your cooperation," he said to the onlookers. "If anyone has footage of what happened, please share it with us. It will be critical in addressing this incident." As the ambulance disappeared into the distance, Jason whispered to Emily, "We're almost there, love. Just hold on a little longer." Though her body was racked with pain, Emily managed a faint smile, her trust in Jason and the team around her unwavering. For the first time that evening, hope began to outweigh fear. Jason sat beside Emily as the ambulance sped toward the hospital, his grip on her hand firm and steady, offering her every ounce of strength he could muster. The tension inside the vehicle remained palpable, lingering like an unwanted guest even as the flashing lights and sirens signaled their imminent arrival at the hospital. Emily's breaths came in short, uneven gasps as another contraction tore through her, her body trembling from the strain. Alex worked quickly to monitor her vitals, his fingers deftly adjusting the equipment. "We're almost there," he reassured them, glancing at the heart monitor's steady rhythm. "Just a couple more minutes." Emily, her face drenched in sweat, barely nodded, her lips forming silent prayers as her grip on Jason's hand tightened. Jason leaned down closer to her, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. "You're doing so well, Emily," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of his own fear. He hated seeing her in pain, hated the helplessness clawing at his chest, and hated even more the delay that had robbed them of precious time. His mind replayed the confrontation with Officer Thompson, the image of the officer's smug face and his fists clenched in anger. But now wasn't the time to dwell on the past, all that mattered was getting Emily and their unborn child to safety. Suddenly, the ambulance made a sharp turn, jolting Emily and pulling Jason from his thoughts. Alex steadied himself against the side panel and called out to the driver. "Easy, we're carrying precious cargo back here." The driver didn't respond but adjusted his handling, clearly pushing the ambulance to its limits. Jason looked out the small rear window and could still see the faint glow of the police cruiser's lights fading into the distance, a reminder of the chaos they had just escaped. He felt a pang of anger and frustration but forced himself to focus on Emily. "We're almost there," he repeated, as much to convince himself as to reassure her. Alex's calm voice broke through the tension again. "Mrs. Bennett, I need you to try and breathe through this contraction. Long, slow breaths, in and out. Can you do that for me?" Emily nodded faintly, her strength waning as another wave of pain swept through her. "Jason, help her count. She needs your voice right now." Jason nodded, leaning close to her ear. "Breathe with me, Emily. In, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. His voice was steady despite the tremor in his chest, and Emily's breathing gradually began to sync with his. When the ambulance finally screeched to a halt in front of the emergency room, the tension in the vehicle eased slightly, replaced by the urgency of action. The back doors were flung open, and a team of medical staff rushed forward, their faces focused and professional. "We've got a 32-year-old female in active labor with complications," Alex called out, handing over a quick summary of Emily's condition as the team prepared to move her inside. Jason stayed close to Emily's side, refusing to let go of her hand as the gurney was wheeled out. "I'm right here," he told her, his voice firm with determination. Inside the hospital, the scene was a flurry of motion. Nurses and doctors moved with practiced efficiency, setting up monitors, inserting IVs, and preparing Emily for an emergency evaluation. Jason was gently guided to a chair by a kind nurse, who offered him a cup of water and a reassuring smile. "She's in good hands," the nurse said, her tone soothing. "We'll keep you updated." Jason nodded numbly, his gaze fixed on the double doors that had just closed behind Emily. For a moment, he felt utterly alone, the weight of the evening pressing down on him. Just then, the sound of hurried footsteps approached, and Jason looked up to see his father-in-law, Daniel, entering the waiting area. Daniel was a sharp, commanding man in his early 60s, with a no-nonsense demeanor honed from years as a high-profile attorney. His eyes scanned the room before landing on Jason, who rose to meet him. "Where's Emily?" Daniel demanded, his voice steady but laced with concern. "They just took her back," Jason replied, his voice hoarse. She's in rough shape, Daniel." The delay made everything worse. Daniel's jaw tightened, his mind already racing through the implications of what Jason had just said. "Tell me everything," he said firmly, his eyes boring into Jason's. Jason recounted the events of the evening in painstaking detail, the desperate rush to the hospital, the abrupt stop by Officer Thompson, the unnecessary aggression, and the precious minutes wasted as Emily's condition worsened. By the time Jason finished, Daniel's face was a mask of controlled fury. "That officer's actions were not only reckless but criminal," he said, his voice low and icy. "He'll be held accountable. I'll make sure of it." Before either man could say more, the double doors swung open, and a doctor in blue scrubs emerged. He approached them with a calm but serious expression, glancing between Jason and Daniel. "Are you the family of Emily Bennett?" he asked. Jason nodded quickly. "Yes, I'm her husband." "How is she? How's the baby?" The doctor took a measured breath. "The situation was critical, but we managed to stabilize both Emily and the baby. We had to perform an emergency C-section due to fetal distress, and Emily experienced complications from elevated blood pressure caused by stress. However, they're both in the ICU and being closely monitored." Jason exhaled shakily, his knees nearly buckling under the weight of relief. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking. Daniel placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, his expression softening slightly. "Can we see her?" Jason asked. The doctor nodded. "You can, but only briefly. She needs rest, and the next 24 hours will be critical." Jason and Daniel followed the doctor down a long corridor to the ICU, their footsteps echoing in the sterile hallway. When they reached Emily's room, Jason hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. Emily lay propped up in the hospital bed, her face pale and drawn but peaceful. In her arms, swaddled in a soft blue blanket, was their newborn son. Jason's breath hitched as he approached the bed, his eyes welling with tears. "Hey, love," he said softly, leaning down to kiss her forehead. Emily smiled weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "We made it." Daniel stood back, watching the tender moment between his daughter and son-in-law. His heart swelled with pride and relief, but his mind remained sharp and focused. He had a job to do, justice needed to be served for the unnecessary ordeal his family had endured. As Jason cradled his newborn son for the first time, Daniel quietly stepped out of the room, already pulling out his phone. He had calls to make and plans to set in motion. The officer who had jeopardized Emily's life and the life of her child would face the consequences, and Daniel would ensure that no other family would suffer the same fate. Daniel's footsteps echoed down the hospital corridor as he made his way back to the waiting area. His mind was racing, filled with equal parts relief and anger. Emily and the baby were stable for now, but the thought of how close they had come to tragedy left him seething. As a high-powered attorney, Daniel was no stranger to confronting injustice, but this situation felt personal in a way that none of his previous cases ever had. He couldn't shake the image of Jason's strained face, recounting the horrifying ordeal on the roadside, or the sound of the doctor's words. The delay exacerbated the complications. To Daniel, that delay was not just a misstep, it was a direct assault on the well-being of his family. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made the first call. "Jack," he said briskly when the voice on the other end answered. "I need you on this immediately. Officer Robert Thompson, 7th Precinct. I want his entire record, complaints, disciplinary actions, everything. Spare no detail. Jack Thornton, a trusted private investigator with a reputation for uncovering deeply buried secrets, didn't hesitate. "I'll get started tonight," he replied. "If there's dirt on him, I'll find it." Daniel hung up, his jaw set in grim determination. Thompson had crossed a line, and Daniel intended to ensure that he faced the full weight of accountability. As Daniel returned to the waiting area, he found Jason seated in a chair, his head in his hands. The young man looked utterly exhausted, the emotional toll of the evening etched into every line of his face. Daniel sat down beside him, his usual commanding presence tempered by a rare softness. "Jason," he began, his voice low and steady, "Emily and the baby are safe. That's what matters most. But what happened tonight, it can't go unaddressed. That officer needs to answer for his actions." Jason lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot but resolute. "I know," he said, his voice hoarse. "What he did was beyond wrong. He put Emily and our baby in danger, all because of his ego. I don't want anyone else to go through what we did." Daniel nodded, placing a reassuring hand on Jason's shoulder. "We'll make sure of that. I've already set things in motion. But I need you to be prepared for what's to come. This won't be an easy fight. There will be scrutiny, pushback, and no shortage of challenges. Are you ready for that?" Jason met his father-in-law's gaze, his expression unyielding. "For Emily and our son. I'm ready for whatever it takes." The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, Daniel received an email from Jack. The subject line was simple but ominous: Thompson report. Daniel opened the attached file and began to read, his eyes narrowing with every line. Thompson's record was damning. Over the course of his career, he had amassed a disturbing number of complaints: excessive force, verbal abuse, intimidation, and even allegations of assault. Yet, time and again, these complaints had been quietly dismissed or settled internally, leaving his official record nearly spotless. It was a textbook case of systemic failure, where accountability had been sacrificed in the name of protecting one of their own. Daniel's anger simmered as he continued reading. This wasn't just about Thompson's actions on the night Emily was rushed to the hospital. It was about a pattern of behavior that had been allowed to persist unchecked, endangering countless lives in the process. Daniel picked up his phone and dialed Jack's number. "This is more than enough," he said, his tone steely. "Send everything to my office. We're going public with this. I want his history in every court record, every paper, every newsroom. This stops now." By the time Daniel arrived at his downtown law firm, his legal team was already gathered in the conference room, their faces reflecting a mix of curiosity and determination. Daniel wasted no time laying out the situation. "We're moving forward with legal action against Officer Thompson," he announced. "We have grounds for both criminal and civil charges: assault, obstruction of medical services, reckless endangerment, and abuse of power. This is more than a personal case, it's about systemic accountability." Linda Cho, a senior attorney known for her meticulous approach, leaned forward, her pen poised over a legal pad. "With the evidence we've compiled, we can push for an indictment," she said. "The video footage, the EMT's testimony, and Thompson's documented history will paint a clear picture of his unfitness for duty." Daniel nodded. "I want to make sure that every single one of his actions that night is examined. And I want his past misconduct to be part of the record. He needs to answer for everything." Another attorney, Matt Jacobs, chimed in. "We should also consider civil charges. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligence, and punitive damages. This will reinforce our criminal case and ensure maximum accountability." Daniel's gaze hardened. Do it. File both criminal and civil charges. I want him stripped of his badge and made to face every consequence of his actions. And once we're done with him, I want his enablers in the department held accountable, too. As the team began strategizing, Daniel's phone buzzed with a notification. The first video of the incident had surfaced online, capturing Thompson shoving Jason against the ambulance as Emily's desperate cries echoed from inside. Within hours, the video had gone viral, drawing widespread outrage. Comments poured in, condemning Thompson's actions and calling for justice. "This is just the beginning," Daniel said to his team, his voice resolute. "The court of public opinion is on our side. Now we need to deliver in the courtroom." Meanwhile, Thompson was feeling the heat. Sitting alone in his dimly lit apartment, he scrolled through social media, watching as his name became synonymous with abuse of power. The videos were damning, and the public backlash was swift and unforgiving. He had spent years skating through his career with a mix of arrogance and impunity, but this time felt different. The weight of his actions, and their consequences, was closing in. Back at the hospital, Jason sat by Emily's bedside, holding their newborn son in his arms. The baby's tiny fingers curled around his father's thumb, a poignant reminder of the life that had almost been lost. Emily, still pale but recovering, watched them with a tired smile. "He's perfect," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Jason nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. "He's a miracle." Their quiet moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Daniel stepped inside, his expression a mix of warmth and resolve. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" he asked, bending down to kiss Emily's forehead. "Better," she replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. "Thank you for everything, Dad. I know you're fighting for us." Daniel smiled softly. "I'd do it all over again," he said firmly. "But this isn't just for you. It's for every family that's been wronged. We're going to make sure this never happens again." As the family sat together, the weight of their ordeal began to lift, replaced by a sense of hope and determination. They had faced unimaginable challenges, but they had emerged stronger, united by their love and resolve. And while the fight for justice was far from over, they knew they had the strength, and the support, to see it through. The courtroom was packed when the verdict was finally announced. Daniel sat between Jason and Emily, their hands clasped tightly as the jury foreperson rose to deliver the decision. The months of legal battles, sleepless nights, and emotional toll weighed heavily on all of them, but Daniel's unyielding determination to secure justice had kept the family moving forward. The foreperson cleared her throat and spoke the words they had all been waiting for: "We find the defendant, Officer Robert Thompson, guilty on all counts." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room, followed by murmurs of approval from the audience. Emily leaned into Jason, her tears of gratitude flowing freely, while Daniel sat upright, his expression steely but satisfied. Justice had prevailed, not only for Emily and their child but for every individual who had suffered under Thompson's unchecked authority. The judge addressed Thompson directly, his tone grave. "Your actions reflect a gross abuse of the trust and authority granted to you as a law enforcement officer. You endangered lives, undermined public safety, and eroded trust in the very institution you were sworn to uphold. This court sentences you to 7 years in state prison and permanently bars you from serving in any capacity within law enforcement." The gavel struck, marking the end of the trial, but the beginning of a new chapter for Emily, Jason, and their family. As Thompson was led away, his shoulders slumped and his face devoid of the arrogance that had once defined him, it was clear that the weight of his actions, and the consequences, had finally caught up with him. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Daniel and his family, their cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward. Daniel held his ground, addressing the crowd with the same commanding presence that had carried him through the trial. "Today's verdict is not just a victory for my family," he began, his voice firm and resolute, "but for every family who has ever been failed by the systems meant to protect them. Justice has been served, and a message has been sent. No one is above accountability, not even those in positions of power." His words were met with applause from the gathered crowd, many of whom held signs reading, "Justice for Emily," and "Accountability now." It was a moment of triumph, but also a sobering reminder of the work still to be done. Back at the hospital, Emily cradled her newborn son, her heart finally at peace after months of fear and uncertainty. Jason sat beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder as they both gazed down at their child. "We made it," Emily whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Jason nodded, tears filling his eyes. "Because of you," he replied. "Because of all of us." In the doorway, Daniel stood silently, his gaze softening as he took in the scene. He had fought battles in courtrooms his entire career, but this victory was different, it was personal. As he stepped into the room and embraced his daughter, son-in-law, and grandson, he felt a deep sense of purpose and fulfillment. Together, they had endured the unthinkable, and together, they would build a future defined not by the pain they had faced, but by the love, strength, and resilience that had carried them through. The story resonates deeply with the challenges we often face in navigating authority, accountability, and resilience in our personal and professional lives. Like Emily and her family, many of us encounter situations where we feel powerless against those in positions of authority, whether it's in the workplace, legal systems, or personal relationships. The persistence of Daniel and his family to fight for justice, despite overwhelming obstacles, mirrors the importance of standing up for what is right, even when the odds are stacked against us. Their journey teaches us the value of resilience, unity, and the importance of leveraging the power of truth and evidence to confront injustice. It also highlights how one's actions, no matter the position of power, must always be held accountable to ensure fairness and equity for everyone involved. Relating this to my own life, I've faced moments where I had to challenge systems or individuals who misused their authority. These situations tested my patience, composure, and resolve, much like what Daniel experienced in the courtroom. One key takeaway from this story is the importance of preparation and persistence. Daniel's unwavering determination, supported by facts and evidence, was crucial in achieving justice for his family. Similarly, in my life, when faced with difficult situations, I've learned that a calm, measured approach, paired with thorough preparation, is far more effective than reacting emotionally or impulsively. There's strength in staying composed, even when emotions are high. This principle applies universally, whether I'm addressing workplace disputes, advocating for myself or others, or navigating complex personal decisions. Another vital lesson from the story is the power of community and support systems. Daniel's ability to gather a team, including legal professionals and even bystanders, was pivotal in holding Officer Thompson accountable. It reminds me that we don't have to face our struggles alone. Reaching out to trusted allies, whether they're colleagues, friends, or family members, can provide the strength and resources needed to confront adversity. In my current life, I've come to realize the value of leaning on others during tough times and offering support in return. It's a reminder that unity and collective action can bring about meaningful change, even in situations that initially seem insurmountable. The story also emphasizes the importance of standing firm in the face of intimidation or fear. Daniel and Jason's resolve not to back down, despite Thompson's abuse of power, is a powerful reminder that courage isn't the absence of fear but the decision to act in spite of it. This lesson is particularly relevant when I find myself in situations where I might be hesitant to speak up due to potential backlash. Whether it's addressing a colleague's unfair treatment or challenging an unjust decision, I'm reminded that change often begins with one voice willing to break the silence. Fear of conflict should never override the pursuit of fairness and integrity. One piece of advice I can take from this story and apply to my life is to maintain clarity of purpose, especially when the path ahead feels overwhelming. In the story, Daniel never lost sight of his ultimate goal: justice and safety for his family. Similarly, staying focused on my end goals, whether they involve personal growth, professional success, or fostering strong relationships, helps me navigate challenges without becoming consumed by distractions or setbacks. Life is full of unpredictable obstacles, but clarity of purpose acts as a compass, guiding me toward meaningful achievements. Finally, the story underscores the importance of forgiveness and healing, even after justice is served. While Daniel's fight was about accountability, it was also about ensuring his family could move forward in peace. In my life, I've realized that holding on to anger or resentment only weighs me down. Learning to let go and focus on rebuilding is essential for personal growth and emotional well-being. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting the wrongs done, but rather choosing to prioritize my peace over prolonged bitterness. In conclusion, the story of Daniel, Emily, and their family serves as a powerful reminder of the resilience required to face adversity and the importance of seeking justice with integrity. It's a call to remain steadfast in our values, seek the support of our community, and maintain a clear focus on what truly matters. In my current life, I aim to apply these lessons by embracing resilience, staying grounded in my purpose, and finding strength in unity. Life will always present challenges, but with determination and the right support, I believe I can overcome them and emerge stronger, just as Daniel and his family did.
Thank you for watching. If you have any comments, please comment below the video. Please subscribe to the channel to support us.